Alright, so we're back with another list video. I love making these, and today we're going to be talking about some great childhood games. My favorite favorite nostalgia games, whatever you want to call it. Let's get into it. What makes a childhood game a childhood game? Obviously, beyond just them being games that you played in your childhood, there is more to it. To me, what makes a childhood game is a game that allows you and sort of serves as a time machine. It takes you back to a moment in time. Little did we know when we started playing these games as children, they were cementing themselves in that moment. And for instance, when I play, there's a Game Boy Advance game on here. When I play that Game Boy game, it takes me back to those field trips when I would play this and look over at my cousin and talk about how far we'd gotten or which battle we were on. They served more of a purpose than we even knew at the time. And now when I play them, I can think about those treasure moments, and to me, that's what really makes a childhood game. A game that cemented itself in your history and as a moment in time, more than just the game even itself. We're gonna get this started with a classic, possibly my favorite game of all time. It's gonna be The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker. Growing up by the sea like I did, it just captured my imagination in a way that many other games couldn't. I constantly imagined myself just taking a boat and sailing out there, seeing what's out there. And to me, that ocean right outside of my doorstep felt like the great sea itself. I could just picture that beautiful soundtrack playing as I hit the sea. This game was beautiful. And as someone who played the original Legend of Zelda as my first Zelda game, I can't believe how far it came in just 16 years. It's crazy. And this game really was my first open world game. Now, you could argue something like the original Legend of Zelda was an open world game, but when it came to true open world 3D games, it really was this game for me. And having my first open world game be on the sea in such an epic fashion, and my favorite franchise ever really, was just a great way to introduce me to open world games. And I couldn't believe what Zelda was becoming before my eyes as a kid on the GameCube. The best part about it to me, I would say the sea is pretty beautiful, and that's certainly an essential part of the Wind Waker game. But to me, it's really about the island you start out on, Outset Island. One of the best, and it's something that Zelda does great, one of the best tutorial areas ever. I love that little island. There's something about it that feels so mysterious and weird, but there's so many little secrets you can find. The fact that you can kind of go into the water too, it's just kind of fun and exciting. And it gets you teased into what's coming next because you can see the sea all around you. And it just spoke to me so much. I love the creepy little forest on top. I love everything about it. And it's such a great way to start. Link waking up in the tower with the telescope and everything like that. It's just, Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker really awakened my imagination in a way I didn't know games could. And it has to be on this list just for that reason. Alright, here it is. Second on my list is James Bond and Nightfire. I really wonder how many people have played this game. I don't know, this is one of those games that your parents sort of buy just because, or they think you might like it, they saw it there, they know you like the James Bond movies, or maybe they like them, so they're like, oh cool, Pierce Brosnan, I'll get it. Let's see if he likes it. And hey, I'm sure a fair amount of people played this game because the GoldenEye was one of those standard setting games on the N64. Or wherever you played it. I know that the James Bond games were pretty popular back in the day, so I'm sure this had somewhat of a decent fan base, but for me, this game was really my childhood. It was this one and Everything or Nothing, I think, which was on the GameCube, and that had some cool co-op, but on Nightfire, it wasn't about the co-op story because that didn't exist. It was more about how cool the story itself was, and how the multiplayer was, and how fun that was. It actually has a really cool story. So you start out, and all I remember about it really is you have a sniper rifle. It's like an albino sniper rifle, and you're trying to infiltrate a snowy castle party. And you kind of have to move around the castle stealth style and just sort of try to find your way in. And it's awesome. It's an awesome way to start. There's also a level that takes place where you're sort of walking through a Japanese dojo of sorts, and you find yourself faced with an evil, demon-eyed, red, night vision goggled ninja who surprisingly kills someone that you were talking to, and then you have to fight this ninja in a crazy like gun versus sword battle, and it's awesome. But like I was saying, the real beauty laid in the multiplayer. Just like with GoldenEye, the story was kind of fun. With those old James Bond games, it really was all about the multiplayer. Same thing with The World Is Not Enough, if you ever played that. That was where the money was. And so, me and my cousin played the multiplayer endlessly. In fact, we named our gamer tags after James Bond multiplayer characters, basically, back in the day, and we just had a ton of fun. It made us laugh more than any other multiplayer game we'd ever played. And that's another theme with some of these games that you're going to see. It turns out that those childhood games, what made them so great were the opportunities to experience them with someone else. And whether they're co-op, or whether you just had the same game as your friend, your cousin, your family member, it's those opportunities to experience those with someone else. And that's where that nostalgia builds. Having that shared experience with someone, and maybe when you go back and play that game, you can remember what it was like to play that with them. But anyway, in Nightfire, I'd always play as Oddjob because he was just a goofball and he had this hat that you could throw and it would insta-kill someone. Kind of had like a boomerang, you had to account for the arc of the throw. And it was just freaking awesome. The ninja was in the multiplayer too, and he was just a little psychopath. It seemed like he always had a sentinel, and he would shoot these rockets that he could then control and auto-track us. It was terrifying, honestly. But like all AI in those James Bond multiplayer games, they would kill themselves constantly, and they would often get stuck somewhere. So the amount of times there was this one map where there was a lodge at the bottom and then a castle at the top. We loved to stay by the lodge, it was kind of more interesting, but sometimes you go up to the castle and there were a few routes you could take. You could cut right up the middle of the map, or you could go through the right. I don't think there was a path on the left if you were heading up, but if you go right, there's sort of a ravine, a canyon you can go through. And oftentimes, if we were playing like Last One Standing and we were looking for the enemy AI, we were on teams, then we would look up and there's Ninja running at the top of the mountain, just glitching the heck out, stuck as heck. So we just pop him and put him out of his misery. But gosh, it was just such a good time. Special stuff, James Bond. All right, going back to another classic. I'm sure that many people played this one. We're going back to Pokemon Yellow because it's the first game I played with my little hands in my mother's lap. I remember playing that, and Pokemon Yellow blew my mind. I just loved seeing the little Pikachu going around. So it's Pokemon Yellow for the sentimental value, but really as a true child, whatever that means, it really was Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and or Fire Red and Leaf Green. I remember when Fire Red and Leaf Green came out, they had those wireless adapters that you could use to be able to play with each other, and I think that they were included with the game. And that blew our minds too, because we had the wired connection. Being able to battle with the actual wireless connection was so cool. On Ruby and Sapphire, we did the wired connection, of course, but what we would do was a fun system we had. We would go through, and we called it a race. It wasn't really, because we had to wait for someone. It's like if you race, but you wait for someone at the end of every lap, and then you talk or you battle it out, whatever. But we would essentially meet at every gym in battle. And so it was sort of like we were creating our own rival on top of the actual rival in the game. And sure enough, those battles were more interesting than the ones with the rival. And they were just a blast. We were always so excited to see which starter the other person chose and which Pokemon they'd caught. And then maybe we'd adjust after that battle and catch something that might defeat, my cousin's Pokemon setup and so forth. So it was a blast. Pokemon is just an all-time classic, of course. I'm sure this is on many people's childhood games lists, and I had to put it on here because we played those games endlessly. To give one final edge, I would probably give it to Ruby and Sapphire. I personally love the Johto, the Generation 2 world, the most. I know that's a hot take. I just think it's kind of weird and interesting. Next game, we've got Spyro. This is another one that I played on the early PlayStation that I don't know how many people played this game. I know that it was popular enough to warrant a remaster, but back in the day, that was kind of one of the fun parts about it. You didn't know, holy cow, this game bombed, it had terrible sales. Especially as a kid, you weren't paying attention to that stuff. So you weren't sort of altered from public opinion. And so what happened with Spyro was my mother loved it, And so I ended up playing it myself, and I freaking loved it too. You know, it was very Mario 64. It had a lot of that DNA where you have your hub world, and then you have your worlds you can go in and out of. And I remember playing Mario 64 and Super Mario 64, and it didn't click with me because after that first room, everything got a little too hard for me at the time. Especially that lava world. I'm replaying Super Mario 64 right now. That lava world's still tough. The rolling log guy, and yeah, it's a tough one. But Spyro, it was essentially that. It was a platformer. You went to worlds, you collected eggs because the dragon eggs were stolen, and that was in Year of the Dragon specifically, which I think is just peak. But all those games, I played them recently and they still hold up. I do not recommend the remaster because I think it really lost the style and just the tone of that original game. It was a bit spooky and weird, but now it's just so cartoonish, and the Norks lost their charm, and there's so much that I don't like about it. I think it's a beautiful game. Most remasters are, but it's not for me. I love Spyro though. It introduced me to that world and had me really enjoying it. Another one here that I think is fairly popular because people love this series, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. So I played this all the time on the GBA. This was like my classic going on a field trip game, all that stuff. And again, it did what Wind Waker did really well, which I think a lot of these childhood games do, and that is to open my imagination. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, if you don't know, starts out where you're just a bunch of kids and you're in a snowball fight. And it's interesting because it has the same battle system in that snowball fight you have for the rest of the game. That sets the tone, and it also sets the tone for a very cool story because it's essentially saying, hey kid, you are going to be entering this magical world, you're getting bullied, see how powerful you become. And then you even fight the bullies in the world, and it's just very cool. And you essentially enter the Final Fantasy world as this random kid, and again, that just opens up your imagination like, holy cow, what if that's me someday? And all that cool stuff. Kind of like the Polar Express, the Harry Potter effect. These are just normal kids that these things are happening to. So as a kid, when you watch that, it's like, whoa, this is epic. I love the Final Fantasy series on top of all of that. So being able to play that on the go was money. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. What more needs to be said here? I love Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. And when it comes to RPGs and turn-based RPGs, this is one of my favorites of all time. And I've played some really great ones. But this one, it was Mario reimagined to me. I never played the original Paper Mario or Super Paper Mario. I didn't play any of those. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door was my first Paper Mario game, and what a game to start with. Just an awesome game, awesome soundtrack, and in terms of a Mario story, amazing writing, and an interesting story. It's actually interesting, so not much more to say about this game. I love it. Another throwback and another mind-blowing game, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. You can tell Nintendo was a big part of my childhood. But yeah, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror was awesome. I loved Kirby and the Amazing Mirror because of its co-op potential. I remember me and my two cousins got this for Christmas. It was one of those games. And we also got the connections that allowed us to go multiplayer. And it was just awesome because in that game you could go in and out of each other's worlds, and you'd be walking around in a whole different area, and then all of a sudden your cousin could come in, or whoever it is, your friend. And it was just so cool to have such a weird interactive world, and it was sort of the future of co-op gaming to me at the time. It was perfect. Now we've got a racing game on here, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. It was a real question of whether I wanted to put Burnout 3 Takedown or Need for Speed Hot Pursuit on here. I went with Need for Speed because I think I played that more as a kid. Now, I'll be honest, I liked Burnout 3 Takedown more. I thought it was fun. The takedown modes were so interesting. The animations were just so cool. But Need for Speed Hot Pursuit was a blast. I remember me and my cousin, again, a common theme here, would constantly play on a map where there's water on the outside of it, and you're just driving around in a loop, of course. That is what racing is. But the cops would come after you, and one of the funnest things in the world, as they kept leveling up, you know, they'd put spike strips down and they'd get more units and stuff like that. I just remember how fun it was to like save my cousin when he was about to be pulled over, when they finally pit maneuvered him or whatever it was, to pit maneuver a cop or come smashing into him and disrupt everything they're doing. It was awesome, and it felt freaking great. Last one on the list, we've got Call of Duty Blops. Now, I dabbled with shooters. I'd played Modern Warfare 2. I really liked Halo, but I really enjoyed more of the campaign rather than the multiplayer. So when it came to Call of Duty Black Ops, though, that was the first one I really owned. And I loved both the campaign and the multiplayer in that game. It was money. Woods is one of my favorite characters to this day. The stolen deer hunter scene was so epic in my mind as a kid. And everything just felt right. Everything about that game's multiplayer felt right. It felt gritty. It was like dirty. The guns felt heavy, and I was so into that game. The zombies were awesome. It was a special time. And Call of Duty Black Ops was the epitome of online multiplayer. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.